Hello there, welcome to Cool Talk. In my last video, we discussed the age of exploration, culminating in the meeting of two worlds, Europe and the Americas. In the centuries to come, European nations gained untold riches. Religion would decline in influence and revolution would bring in democracy. But before any of this happened, absolutism was the order of the day. Absolutism, in a nutshell, is personal, unchecked, and absolute power. And kings would say that God himself ordained them to be the leaders. Now, the nobles protested, but the kings crushed the opposition. And because the economy in Europe had grown global, unimaginable riches gave monarchs never before seen power and wealth. Now, for quite some time, there was a lot of tension between Catholics and Protestant. Today is a lot different. Today you speak to your neighbor, you get along, and chances are you don't even ask him or her what the religion is. People didn't care, but centuries ago it was very, very different. We had the Inquisition, we had witch hunts. The Reformation brought in the Protestant movement, and tensions were extremely high. In France in 1589, Henry IV became king. Now, he established foundations of law and order, improved agriculture, settled colonies in Quebec. He was the first French king from the House of the Bourbons. He was a good king, but he was a Protestant, and the Catholics did not see him as ordained by God. So Henry IV said, okay, fine, I'll become a Catholic. He got baptized, but this didn't help. And he was assassinated by a Catholic fanatic in 1610. He was 56 years old. His son, Louis XIII, became king, but he was only 8 years old, so his mother became Queen Regent, but she proved to be incompetent. So eventually the Duke of Richelieu, who would later become known as Cardinal Richelieu, became the leader. He became cardinal and also the chief minister of France. And for the next few decades, Richelieu ran France. He centralized all the power for the king, kept the nobles in check, and made sure that the Austrian, Spanish Habsburgs were kept at bay. The Holy Roman Empire was going through a series of religious tensions. Back in 1555, the Peace of Augsburg Act stated that whoever was the king, whatever his religion was, that was the official religion of the country. And people had to follow this. Somewhat religions were respected. But then came King Ferdinand II. Ferdinand II stated that he would not respect the Peace of Augsburg of 1555, and this angered the Protestants. This is a modern-day photo of Prague in the Czech Republic. Back at the time, it was known as the Kingdom of Bohemia. Now, the Bohemian Protestant peasants were very angry at Ferdinand II. In fact, they went to the townspeople and gathered up the administrators that were there and threw them out a window. This window. Now, this is like about 68 feet high. And somehow, these councilmen survived. Now, if you asked a Catholic how did they survive, he would say, well, angels came down from the heaven and protected them. If you asked a Protestant, they would say, well, the people fell out a window, but they landed on a big pile of manure. So they survived. But this began the 30-Year War. And when the 30-Year War ended, 8 million people would be dead. Well, the Bohemians lost, but this drew international attention from many, especially Protestant leaders. Now, the Danish Protestants had holdings in the Holy Roman Empire, and backed up by England, Scotland, and of course Denmark, they joined in continuing the battle against the Holy Roman Empire, who was now backed up by the Kingdom of Bohemia, Spain, and Croatia. Well, the Protestants lost again, but then in 1630, the Swedes got involved. From Sweden came Gustavus Adolphus, the father of modern warfare. He was Lutheran, he was tough. He won several battles. Now, France decided to send money and military aid to Sweden to help them in the war. Now, you might be wondering, why would France help Sweden? France is a Catholic country. Well, it so happened that France was also surrounded by countries that were backed up by the House of Habsburg. So they're looking at the balance of power. So now the 30-Year War was becoming less religious and more political. Eventually, France and Sweden switched roles. Sweden would provide military aid, and France would do the fighting. And the 30-Year War went on. There were also witch hunts, hangings. Some villages lost 66% of their populations. 8 million people died across Europe. In conclusion, European borders were set. And now there was no doubt as to who you were going to serve. The borders were set, and you would serve the kings within those borders. You were going to be taxed accordingly. The Holy Roman Empire grew very, very weak. The Dutch got independence from Spain. Sweden became independent from the Holy Roman Empire. France got more territory. But more importantly, it was the end of the Reformation. There wasn't religious independence per se, but there was a religious tolerance. Europe became more political and less religious. And during all of this, in France, Cardinal Richelieu, who had centralized power but taxed the French people heavily, had died. And when he died, the peasants rejoiced. And now we're going to talk about the most absolutist monarch of all, Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, the Grand Monarch, intelligent, disciplined, and oh, the splendor. If you visit France today, about 10 miles from Paris, is the Palace of Versailles. It's a monstrosity that took 32 years to build. 35,000 men worked on it, and it could house over 10,000 people. It's filled with priceless mirrors, mosaics, carpets, tapestries, and surrounding gardens. How much did it cost? We have no idea. The king had the accounting ledgers destroyed. But in today's currency, the cost would run into the billions. 60% of all taxes went towards maintaining the palace of the Versailles and the kings and the nobles that lived there. There was constant partying and gambling, balls and hunting. When King Louis arose in the morning, 150 nobles attended him to help him get dressed. When he dined, it was a procession, a ceremony, as people sat by and watched him eat. Now, he plunged France into 50 years of war, trying to obtain more territory and conquest. But he conquered very little. He was king for 72 years. And when he died, France's treasury was empty, and the nation was heavily in debt. No wonder they eventually had a revolution. Now, in Russia, the Romanov family was ruling. And Tsar Peter the Great, tall, magnetic, and cruel, he brought Russia into the modern world. He founded St. Petersburg, built seaports, built a navy. He brought in scientists. He had Russia become less Asian and more European. He reformed the calendar, the alphabet, and made Russia self-sufficient. Yet he was very cruel and intolerant, even to his own son, who was accused of opposing Peter, and he would die from injuries sustained during torture. In the state of Swabia lived the Hohenzollern family that grew in influence and power and obtained land by the Rhine River. They created a new state, Prussia, which would later become the center of the German nation. In Austria in 1740, Maria Theresa became queen. There had never been a female ruler of Austria until then, and she was challenged by Frederick the Great of the province of Silesia. Other nations joined in and took sides. In the end, Maria Theresa remained queen, but Austria lost territory to Prussia and France, and it further declined the power of the Holy Roman Empire. By 1733, England had 13 colonies along the Atlantic seaboard in North America, and the French possessed a St. Lawrence River Valley with posts along the Great Lakes, Ohio, and the Mississippi. Fear of encroachment between the French and the British in the Americas culminated in the 7-Year War, or what Americans refer to as the French and Indian War. It was really a global conflict fought in the Americas, West Africa, South Asia, the Philippines, and Europe. Because while England and France fought, Austria tried to recover land that it had lost to Prussia. Prussia became a British ally, and France decided to help Austria. In the end, France fails, and Britain rises as a world power. Well, during all of this came religious freedoms, as I mentioned, and free thinking. And all this free thinking brought about other changes, advances in the arts and political science, but also in areas such as prison reform and treatment of the sick and mentally insane. And all these free thinkers grew tired of heavy taxes and absolutism and brought in a new era, an age of democratic revolutions in Britain and France and the birth of the United States. But this would come in the next couple of videos. But until then, send me your likes or dislikes, comments, or better yet, subscribe. This is Cool Talk.